Not everything that shines is light. In today's world, spirituality can be a path to freedom or just another mask for the ego. How do we tell the difference? You know that moment when you realize you've been fooling yourself? That gut-wrenching second when the mirror cracks and you see what's really staring back at you? Well, buckle up, because today we're diving into the most uncomfortable truth in the spiritual world, one that 90% of seekers refuse to face. Here's what you don't know about the spiritual path. It's crawling with counterfeits. And the scary part? You might be living one right now. False spirituality isn't some obvious cult with red flags waving. It's that meditation practice that became another way to avoid your problems. It's those healing crystals that somehow never heal your need to buy more crystals. It's that enlightened guru persona you wear on social media while screaming at traffic 5 minutes later. The real kicker? False spirituality feels amazing. It gives you that sweet dopamine hit of being special, chosen, awakened. You collect spiritual experiences like Instagram followers, each one feeding your ego while disguising itself as humility. You speak in spiritual buzzwords, attend every workshop, and yet something feels hollow. True spirituality strips you naked. False spirituality gives you prettier clothes to hide in. The difference is brutal, but simple. Real spiritual growth makes you more human, not less. It doesn't elevate you above others. It connects you deeper to their struggles. It doesn't give you magical thinking. It gives you radical responsibility. When your spiritual practice becomes another way to feel superior, another escape hatch from reality, another performance for applause, that's when you know you've fallen into the trap. The most dangerous part? False spirituality often starts with genuine seeking, but somewhere along the way, the ego hijacks the journey, turning your quest for truth into a quest for spiritual identity. If this hit different, don't let this channel slip away. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What do we mean by false spirituality? Imagine this. You're dying of thirst in a desert, and someone offers you a crystal clear glass of water. You drink deeply, feeling immediate relief. But 20 minutes later, you're more parched than ever. What happened? You just discovered the cruel trick of salt water. It looks exactly like what you need, but it's actually making your problem worse. This is false spirituality in a nutshell. Before you roll your eyes thinking this is another "my way is the only way" religious argument, stop. This isn't about Buddhism versus Christianity or yoga versus prayer. This isn't about picking the right spiritual team. False spirituality can hijack any tradition, any practice, any path. It's not what you do, it's why you're really doing it. Here's what separates the real from the counterfeit. True spirituality tastes like humility. It makes you smaller, not bigger. When you touch something genuinely sacred, your first instinct isn't to post about it or teach others. It's to sit quietly with the overwhelming sense that you know absolutely nothing. Real spiritual experiences humble you into silence, not turn you into a guru. True spirituality transforms you whether you like it or not. It doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you need. And what you need is usually uncomfortable. Authentic spiritual growth feels like emotional surgery without anesthesia. You don't get to choose which parts of yourself get renovated. True spirituality makes you useful to others, not in a martyr complex way, but naturally. Like how a healthy tree can't help but provide shade and oxygen. You stop asking, "What's in it for me?" and start asking, "How can I help?" False spirituality, on the other hand, is salt water dressed up as spring water. It inflates your ego while convincing you that you're becoming more humble. It lets you avoid your real problems by labeling them old energy or low vibration. It turns ancient wisdom into a personal shopping mall where you pick what feels good and ignore what challenges you. False spirituality gives you control, or at least the illusion of it, manifesting the perfect life, protecting yourself with white light bubbles, using spiritual practices to get what you want. Real spirituality strips away control and teaches you to trust something bigger than your plans. The most dangerous part? False spirituality often works temporarily. You feel better, more confident, more special. Your life might even improve for a while, but like salt water, it creates a deeper thirst. You need more workshops, more techniques, more validation. You become a spiritual consumer instead of a genuine seeker. Here's the test. After your spiritual practice, do you feel more connected to the difficult people in your life or more separate from them? Do you feel more willing to admit your mistakes or more convinced of your enlightenment? Do you feel ordinary and grateful or special and chosen? The salt water always reveals itself eventually. But by then, many seekers are so spiritually dehydrated they can't tell the difference anymore. The four horsemen of spiritual deception. What if I told you that the person you were 5 years ago would be absolutely horrified by who you've become spiritually? Not because you've grown, but because you've been hijacked. Right now, somewhere in the world, there's a version of you that never fell for any of this. A version that trusted their own inner knowing instead of collecting spiritual identities like Instagram filters. A version that found real peace instead of performing enlightenment for strangers on the internet. That version of you? They're looking at you right now with a mixture of sadness and disbelief. They're wondering how someone so intelligent, so sincere, so genuinely seeking truth could have been seduced by such elaborate spiritual theater. But here's the thing that'll shatter everything you thought you knew. That other version of you isn't gone. They're buried underneath layers of spiritual programming, waiting for you to remember what authentic seeking actually feels like. See, what happened to you isn't your fault. You were targeted. There are 4 specific spiritual traps designed by people who study human psychology, who understand your deepest longings, who know exactly which buttons to push to turn genuine seekers into spiritual consumers. And the scariest part? These traps are so sophisticated that falling for them actually feels like spiritual progress. The ego emperor's new robes. Let's start with the most intoxicating trap of all, ego-driven spirituality. This isn't about obvious spiritual arrogance, no. This beast is far more cunning. It whispers sweet nothings about how advanced you are, how you've transcended what others struggle with. You know that person who meditates for 2 hours daily but can't handle criticism? That's ego wearing meditation robes. You know the one who speaks fluently about oneness, but judges everyone's spiritual choices? That's separation, disguised as unity. Here's the brutal truth. The moment you think you're more awakened than someone else, you've just proven you're not. Real awakening doesn't create hierarchy, it dissolves it. The mystics warned us about this for centuries. Rumi called it the disease of being somebody. The Zen masters had a saying, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him," meaning destroy any sense of spiritual superiority. But here's what's really twisted. This trap gets stronger the more genuine progress you make. It's like a spiritual parasite that feeds on your actual growth, turning every breakthrough into another reason to feel special. The spiritual shopping mall. Next up, commercialized spirituality, the designer handbag version of enlightenment. This one's everywhere, and it's brilliant in its simplicity. Take ancient wisdom, slap a price tag on it, and suddenly, seeking truth becomes collecting experiences. You've seen them. Those Instagram influencers with perfect altars, selling $500 transformational courses from their Bali retreats. Nothing wrong with making a living from spiritual work. But when the brand matters more than the breakthrough, something's rotting in paradise. Here's the red flag test. If your spiritual practice requires constant purchasing to feel valid, you're not on a path. You're in a marketplace. When your meditation cushion costs more than some people's monthly rent. When your crystals need their own insurance policy. When you're more excited about the packaging than the practice, that's consumer spirituality. The real kicker. Ancient masters found enlightenment with nothing but a bowl and a robe. Yet somehow we've been convinced we need the deluxe awakening package with premium accessories. But here's what the spiritual shopping industrial complex doesn't want you to know. The most profound transformations happen when you stop buying and start being. The Great Spiritual Escape Act. Then there's escapist spirituality, perhaps the most dangerous because it feels so virtuous. This is love and light as a weapon against reality. It's using spiritual concepts to avoid the messy, uncomfortable, shadow-filled parts of being human. You know this person. They radiate positivity but have never processed their childhood trauma. They talk about raising their vibration while their relationships crumble. They're all about manifestation, but won't face why they keep attracting the same toxic patterns. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Real spirituality doesn't lift you above human experience. It drops you deeper into it. It doesn't make you immune to pain. It makes you wise about suffering. True spiritual bypassing looks like enlightenment, but feels like emotional numbness. The shadow work nobody talks about? Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is feel angry. Sometimes the highest vibration is honest grief. Sometimes raising consciousness means lowering your guard and admitting you're not okay. This category is sneaky because it uses spiritual language to justify spiritual cowardice. Everything happens for a reason becomes an excuse to avoid fighting injustice. Just send them love becomes a way to dodge difficult conversations. The false prophet's playground. Finally, the darkest category, manipulative cultic spirituality. This isn't just about obvious cult leaders with compound complexes. This is about any spiritual authority who exploits the genuine hunger for truth. Here's how it works. They identify your deepest spiritual longing, then position themselves as the exclusive gateway to fulfilling it. They don't just want your money, they want your mind, your autonomy, your ability to question. The warning signs: secrecy disguised as sacred knowledge, unquestioning obedience marketed as surrender, isolation from friends and family called releasing lower vibrations, financial exploitation wrapped in energetic exchange. But here's the most insidious part. They don't start with control. They start with love bombing, with making you feel special, chosen, finally understood. They give you exactly what your ego's been craving. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, they make that feeling conditional on your compliance. The real test of any spiritual teacher, they should make you more independent, not more dependent. They should point you toward your own inner authority, not cement their outer authority over you. Here's what nobody prepared you for. These 4 categories aren't separate. They're a progression. Ego spirituality leads to consumer spirituality. Consumer spirituality enables escapist spirituality. And all 3 create the perfect conditions for manipulative spirituality to thrive. But here's why you're different from 99% of seekers. You're willing to look at these shadows instead of pretending they don't exist. You're brave enough to question your own motivations instead of just questioning others. That uncomfortable feeling rising in your chest right now as you recognize yourself in these patterns, that's not shame. That's awakening. That's the beginning of real spiritual maturity. If this hits you where it counts, don't let wisdom like this disappear into the algorithm. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below sharing which category caught you off guard. Because content this raw doesn't trend, but it transforms lives. And I wouldn't want this channel to slip away from seekers like you who are ready for the unfiltered truth. Why we fall into it. There's a moment in every seeker's journey that spiritual predators can smell from miles away. It's that raw, desperate instant when you realize you can't keep living the way you've been living. When the pain becomes so loud that you'd literally try anything to make it stop. They know you're coming before you even know you're seeking. See, what nobody tells you about the spiritual marketplace is that it's designed around one fundamental truth. Wounded people make the best customers. Not because they're gullible, but because they're genuinely hungry. And hunger, my friend, is the most powerful sales tool in existence. Let's start with the big one, psychological hunger. You know that ache inside you? That sense that something's fundamentally wrong with how you're living? That's not a spiritual calling. That's an open wound. And every false spiritual teacher has a PhD in wound recognition. They can spot your specific brand of pain within 5 minutes of meeting you. Daddy issues? They become your spiritual father. Abandonment, trauma? Suddenly you're part of their soul family. Feel worthless? Congratulations, you're now a chosen light worker. Here's what's brilliant about their strategy. They don't heal your wound. They make it sacred. They convince you that your deepest pain is actually your greatest spiritual gift. Suddenly, that thing that's been destroying you becomes the very reason you're special. But here's the twisted part. Once your wound becomes your spiritual identity, healing it would mean losing your sense of purpose. They've trapped you in spiritual sickness, disguised as spiritual significance. Next up, ego masquerading as spirit. This one's diabolical because it uses your genuine spiritual progress against you. Every real insight you have, every moment of actual growth, gets immediately hijacked by the part of you that wants to be seen as special. You meditate for inner peace, but somehow end up posting about it. You study ancient wisdom, but find yourself dropping Sanskrit words in casual conversation. You have a profound realization, and suddenly you're giving unsolicited spiritual advice to everyone around you. The ego doesn't fight spirituality. It infiltrates it. It puts on robes and starts speaking in spiritual languages. But underneath, it's the same old, look at me, I'm special program running the show. Then there's our cultural addiction to instant everything. We want spiritual awakening like we want our coffee, hot, fast, and exactly how we ordered it. We've been conditioned to believe that if something takes time and discipline, it must not be the right path for us. False spirituality feeds this perfectly. Why spend years in meditation when you can buy a course that promises transformation in 30 days? Why face your shadow when you can just raise your vibration? Why do the inner work when you can manifest your way out of your problems? The uncomfortable truth? Real spiritual growth is more like learning to play piano than ordering takeout. It requires daily practice, endless patience, and zero guarantee of the results you want when you want them. Finally, the deepest hook of all, our desperate need to belong somewhere, to be part of something bigger than our isolated digital lives, to finally find our people who understand us. False spiritual communities exploit this beautifully. They create instant intimacy through shared language, shared beliefs, shared enemies. Suddenly, you're not just lonely anymore. You're part of an awakened tribe fighting for consciousness on planet Earth. But here's the catch: the belonging becomes conditional. You have to keep believing the right things, buying the right products, speaking the right spiritual language to maintain your membership. Your authentic self gets slowly replaced by your spiritual persona. The real tragedy? Your hunger for connection was completely valid. Your need for meaning was absolutely real. Your desire for healing was sacred and pure. They just weaponized it against you. But recognizing these hooks isn't about shame. It's about freedom. Because once you see how the game is played, you can finally stop playing by their rules and start writing your own. The question is, are you ready to let go of who you thought you were supposed to be spiritually and discover who you actually are? Consequences of false spirituality. I met her at a coffee shop in Boulder, Sarah. Used to be a devoted seeker, 10 years deep in the spiritual scene, thousands spent on workshops, retreats, healers. Now she wouldn't even say the word meditation without rolling her eyes. Spirituality? She laughed bitterly. That's just expensive therapy for people who refuse to admit they need therapy. Sarah isn't alone. She's part of a growing graveyard of souls who dove so deep into false spirituality that when they finally surfaced, they'd rather live in complete cynicism than risk being fooled again. See, what the spiritual marketplace doesn't want you to know is that they're not just failing to help people, they're actively creating spiritual refugees. People who had genuine hunger for truth, genuine potential for awakening, but got so burned by the counterfeits that they've sworn off the real thing forever. And that's just the beginning of the carnage. Let's start with the most visible casualty: complete spiritual disillusionment. Right now, there are millions of former seekers who've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. They experienced one too many fake gurus, one too many expensive disappointments, one too many communities that promised transformation but delivered drama. So they concluded that all spirituality is bullshit. All of it. The fake stuff and the real stuff get lumped together and discarded like yesterday's newspaper. Here's what breaks my heart about this. These were often the most sincere seekers, the ones who really wanted to grow, who were willing to invest time, money, and emotional energy in their development. But they got fed spiritual junk food until they developed an allergy to spiritual nourishment altogether. The tragedy: some of these people were probably just one authentic teacher, one genuine practice, one real breakthrough away from the transformation they were seeking. Instead, they're now armed with cynicism, warning others away from any spiritual path. Then there's the financial and emotional carnage. I'm talking about people who've mortgaged their homes to attend life-changing retreats that changed nothing except their bank account balance. People who've spent their children's college funds on healing sessions that left them more broken than before. But the money is just the visible damage. The real destruction happens in the trust centers of their brains. When someone you've given your deepest vulnerability to, someone you've seen as a spiritual authority, exploits that trust, it doesn't just hurt financially. It creates trauma around the very concept of guidance, teaching, and spiritual community. Some never recover the ability to discern genuine wisdom from spiritual sales pitches. They become permanently guarded, unable to receive help even when it's authentic. Others swing completely the other way, becoming serial spiritual shoppers, addicted to the high of new teachers and new modalities, because they never learned to go deep with anything real. Perhaps the most insidious consequence is what I call spiritual plateau prison. These are the people who never leave the false spirituality. They just get comfortable there. They've been circling the same spiritual concepts for years, decades even, without any real transformation. They know all the language. They can talk about chakras and manifestation and shadow work like spiritual scholars. But somehow, none of it ever translates into actual growth. They're spiritual scholars studying the menu instead of eating the meal. Why does this happen? Because false spirituality is designed to keep you comfortable. It gives you just enough insight to feel like you're growing, just enough community to feel connected, just enough ritual to feel spiritual, but never enough challenge to actually transform. These people become spiritual museum pieces, perfectly preserved in amber, surrounded by spiritual artifacts, but never actually alive to the mystery they claim to be exploring. But here's the consequence nobody talks about: the damage to spirituality itself as a cultural force. Every person who gets burned by fake spirituality becomes an unconscious ambassador for materialism. Every cynic created becomes evidence that spiritual seeking is just wishful thinking for people who can't handle reality. This is how an entire culture becomes spiritually barren, not through direct attack on spirituality, but through the slow erosion of trust caused by spiritual counterfeit operations. The real tragedy? While people are getting burned by spiritual theater, the genuine crises of meaning, purpose, and connection that drove them to seek in the first place remain completely unaddressed. They just learn to numb those needs instead of meet them. Here's what keeps me up at night. For every person destroyed by false spirituality, there are probably 10 others who see the carnage and decide never to begin seeking at all. The casualties create a warning system that keeps other genuine seekers away from any spiritual exploration. We're creating a world where the deepest human longings, for meaning, for transcendence, for authentic connection, get dismissed as naivety because the counterfeits have poisoned the well. But here's why you're different. You're seeing these consequences before you become one of them. You're awake to the dangers while you still have time to choose a different path. How to spot fake awakening in 30 seconds. I'm about to give you something worth more than every spiritual course you've ever considered buying. It's a simple test that can instantly reveal whether any spiritual teacher, practice, or community is authentic or just another beautiful trap. Ready? Here it is. Watch how they handle criticism. Authentic spiritual teachers welcome questions. Fake ones silence questioners. Real masters admit mistakes. Counterfeit gurus gaslight you for noticing them. Genuine wisdom traditions encourage healthy skepticism. Spiritual cons demand blind faith. That's it. One test. 30 seconds of observation. And you'll never waste years of your life on spiritual theater again. But that's just the beginning. You're about to become virtually immune to spiritual deception, armed with detection skills that most seekers never develop. Because while everyone else is getting hypnotized by spiritual sales pitches, you'll be seeing through the matrix with X-ray vision. Let's start with the obvious cons. Any spiritual teacher who promises instant awakening is selling you snake oil with Sanskrit labels. Real transformation happens like seasons changing, gradually, naturally, almost imperceptibly, until one day you realize everything's different. But here's the subtler trap, the appearance obsession. When someone's more focused on how enlightened they look than how enlightened they are, you're dealing with spiritual Instagram, not spiritual instruction. Real teachers often look disappointingly ordinary. They're not trying to look the part. They're too busy being the part. Watch out for the toxic positivity pandemic. Anyone who insists you should only focus on love and light while your inner world is on fire is basically handing you spiritual band-aids for surgical problems. Authentic spirituality doesn't avoid darkness, it transforms it. And here's the big one, teacher worship. The moment anyone positions themselves as your exclusive gateway to truth, run fast. Real teachers point you toward your own inner authority. Fake ones make you dependent on their outer authority. Now, authentic spirituality has its own fingerprint, and once you know what to look for, it's unmistakable. Real teachers have what I call humble confidence. They're absolutely certain about what they know and completely honest about what they don't. They teach self-responsibility like it's a sacred practice. Instead of fixing your problems for you, they give you tools to fix them yourself. Instead of telling you what to think, they teach you how to think more clearly. Here's something beautiful about authentic spiritual communities. They make you more yourself, not more like everyone else. Fake communities create spiritual clones who all talk the same, dress the same, and think the same. Real communities celebrate your unique expression of universal truths. And there's a quality I call ordinary profundity. Authentic spiritual insights often sound surprisingly simple. They don't require a spiritual dictionary to understand. Truth has a way of being both incredibly deep and refreshingly clear. Your 3-question truth detector. Now here's your practical toolkit. 3 questions that will instantly reveal the authenticity of any spiritual path, teacher, or practice. Question 1. Does this make me kinder? This one cuts through all spiritual complexity like a laser. Authentic spirituality always makes you more compassionate towards yourself and others. If a practice makes you more judgmental, more superior, more separated from other humans, it's not spiritual growth. It's ego inflation with spiritual makeup. I've seen people meditate for years and become more arrogant. I've watched others study ancient wisdom and become more condescending. Real spirituality dissolves the barriers between you and the world, not builds them higher. Question 2. Am I facing truth or avoiding it? This is the shadow work litmus test. Authentic spirituality always involves confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself, your relationships, your patterns. If a practice only makes you feel good about yourself without challenging you to grow, it's spiritual comfort food, not spiritual nourishment. Real transformation feels like controlled demolition. Parts of your old identity have to come down to make room for who you're becoming. If you're always comfortable, you're probably not growing. Question 3. Does this feel ordinary yet profound? Here's something nobody tells you. Real spiritual insights often feel like remembering something you've always known. They don't feel exotic or mystical. They feel like coming home to yourself. Fake spirituality trades in spiritual fireworks, dramatic experiences, mystical language, extraordinary claims. Real spirituality often feels surprisingly normal, like the most natural thing in the world. The profundity isn't in the presentation, it's in the simplicity. But here's the deepest test of all, the one that separates authentic spiritual maturity from spiritual theater. How does this serve others? Authentic spirituality naturally flows outward. The more genuine growth you experience, the more you want to contribute to the well-being of others, not because you should, but because the boundaries between self and others start dissolving. Fake spirituality keeps you focused inward, on your manifestations, your vibrations, your spiritual status. Real spirituality eventually makes you forget about yourself entirely as you become absorbed in serving something larger. Here's what changes everything. You now have spiritual immunity. While others get seduced by charismatic teachers and impressive promises, you'll be asking the simple questions that reveal everything. You'll watch how they handle criticism. You'll notice whether they're creating dependency or independence. You'll feel whether they're making you kinder or more superior. You'll recognize whether they're helping you face truth or avoid it. And most importantly, you'll trust your own inner knowing instead of outsourcing your spiritual authority to someone else's business model. The irony? The moment you stop needing someone else to validate your spiritual journey is the moment your real spiritual journey begins. Why your demons are actually your greatest teachers. Here's what every fake spiritual teacher hopes you never discover. The parts of yourself you're most ashamed of. The emotions you desperately try to transcend. The negative thoughts you meditate away. Those aren't obstacles to your awakening. They are your awakening. See, while everyone else is chasing the light like spiritual moths, you're about to learn something that the ancient mystics whispered only to their most trusted students. True power doesn't come from avoiding your darkness. It comes from dancing with it. Every genuine spiritual tradition has known this secret for millennia. Jung called it shadow work, befriending the parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. The mystics called it the dark night of the soul, that crushing period where everything you thought you knew about yourself crumbles. Shamans call it initiation, being broken apart so completely that you're reborn as something entirely new. But here's what they all understood that modern spirituality has forgotten. Your demons aren't your enemies. They're your teachers dressed in terrifying costumes. That rage you're so ashamed of, it's trying to teach you about boundaries. That depression you meditate away, it's showing you what isn't working in your life. That jealousy you call low vibrational, it's pointing you toward what you actually desire. The uncomfortable truth? Growth doesn't happen in your comfort zone. It happens in the fire. Real transformation feels like controlled demolition. Parts of who you thought you were have to die for who you're becoming to be born. While others are performing spiritual perfection, you'll be doing the sacred work of becoming authentically whole. And that, my friend, is the difference between spiritual theater and actual awakening. Your spiritual reckoning starts tonight. Right now, as I'm speaking these words, something inside you is shifting. You can feel it, can't you? That uncomfortable recognition, like someone just turned on the lights in a room you thought was already bright. You came here thinking you were learning about other people's spiritual mistakes. But somewhere along the way, this became about you, about your practices, about your teachers, about your motivations. That discomfort you're feeling, that's not shame. That's awakening trying to break through the beautiful lies you've been telling yourself. Here's what we've uncovered together. False spirituality is glitter without gold. It's all sparkle on the surface, but hollow underneath. It promises transformation, but delivers performance. It offers awakening, but creates dependency. True spirituality, it's the opposite of glamorous. It's humility when your ego wants applause. It's depth when the culture demands surface. It's service when your shadow wants special treatment. But here's the question that's going to haunt you tonight, the one that separates the spiritual tourists from the genuine seekers. Is your practice feeding your ego or freeing it from its prison? I want you to sit with that question. Really sit with it. Not the version of you that wants to give the right answer, but the raw, honest part of you that knows the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Are you becoming more humble or more superior? More connected or more separate? More ordinary or more special? More useful to others or more focused on yourself? Because here's what I've learned after years of watching seekers come and go. The spiritual path isn't about collecting experiences, accumulating knowledge, or building a more enlightened identity. It's about the slow, sometimes painful process of becoming truly human. If you've made it this far, you're not like most spiritual seekers. You're willing to question what others accept blindly. The version of you that exists 1 year from now is already calling your name. The question is, are you brave enough to answer? If this conversation cracked something open in you, don't let it close back up. Hit that like button, subscribe for the uncomfortable truths most channels won't share, and tell me in the comments, what spiritual belief are you ready to question? Because your awakening isn't a destination. It's a daily choice to choose truth over comfort, growth over stagnation, authenticity over performance. And tonight, that choice is yours.